This is an audio recording of Rowan of Rin, and we're up to Chapter 8, Flesh and Blood. Marley and Rowan ran towards the sound of Val's voice. John followed Dragon Allen, who was still struggling but starting to look confused instead of angry. They found Val laying face down in a clump of reeds, her feet on solid ground, her body in the mud, her arms around Brondon's waist, and Brondon was fighting her, silently and determinedly fighting to be free, stretching her fingers out to something only she could see, while the swamp pulled her down. Suddenly she called out and plunged away into the mud. Gasped Val. I cannot pull her back. She will not listen to me. If only Alice were here. I cannot think without him. Marley pulled a coil of rope from her pack. Hold me, Rowan, she called, and flung herself down to lay beside Val. Rowan held Marley's ankles and watched for her stretch across the reeds, reaching for Brondon. Marley was tall, but not as tall as Val. She crawled further into the mud. Rowan was pulled forward until he was laying on his belly across the pathway. His muscles strained as Marley pushed her hands under Val's and looped the rope around Brondon's belt. Val too groaned. She'd been bearing Brondon's weight for so long she would not be able to hold on much longer. Back! Rowan tried to pull me back now, shouted Marley. Rowan, try to pull me back now, shouted Marley. Can you do it? Rowan heaved with all his might, but Marley was heavy, and her ankles were slippery with mud. To his horror, he felt his hands beginning to lose their grip. John, he shrieked in desperation. Help Marley, I can't. Marley, there was a scuffle behind him. Then two slim, strong hands came down on top of his own, and Alan's voice was calling, I have you, Marley, as he heaved her to safety with the rope that was Bronwyn's lifeline clutched in her hand. It took all three of them to haul Bronwyn back, while Val lay exhausted on the ground and Rowan stood helplessly by. The mud was holding fast to its victims, and Brondon herself was fighting them. Even when they had her safe at their feet, she was moaning and crying, trying to crawl back into the ooze that had nearly swallowed her forever. Minna, she was weeping. Minna, Minna, Minna. Who's Minna? Rowan whispered to Strong John. He had heard the name before, but he could not think where. Who did Brondon see? John was shaking his head sadly, looking down at the crying woman. I had forgotten little Minna, he said. I'd forgotten all about her until Brondon became so angry with you for thinking of the Buckshire. And I think, except in a secret part of her mind, Brondon had almost forgotten her too. But this place. When we were all children, Rowan, said Alan, and I still new to Rin, Brondon had a friend, one friend, Minna, the keeper of the Buckshire in those days, a little girl as quiet and gentle and fearful as Brondon was loudly and bullying and fearless. They were never apart. For Minna, there was only Brondon and the Buckshire. For Brondon, there was only Minna. I remember Minna, said Marley softly, and so would your mother, Rowan. We all went out looking for her, even the children, the night she disappeared. Brondon groaned and looked up at Val, who was bending over her anxiously. Minna is here, Val, she croaked. I saw her. I heard her voice. I felt her hand on my face. But Val, her strong voice crumpled and tears fell from her eyes. Val, she is still a little girl. She's never grown up. She's been wandering here all these years, all alone. Why did you not let me go to her? Strong John knelt down beside her. Minna died, Brondon, he said gently. They found her bones at last in the bones of the calf she was trying to save in the old mine shaft. You remember? Rowan stared. Minna had been quiet and shy like him. Minna had died, seeking a lost Buckshire. Was that why? We don't know that was Minna with the calf, Brondon moaned. We do not know for sure. I've always wondered. John stroked her forehead. His face was full of pity. Minna is dead, Brondon. Minna is safe and resting in the graveyard. The spirits of the swamp played a terrible trick on you to make you leave the firm ground, as they did with Rowan and his buckshar, and they tried to do it with Alan and his mother. I do not believe in such things. Bronwyn looked around with her terrified eyes. And yet you must speak truly, for Minna cannot be 10 years old still. But I saw her, I felt her, I heard her, I gripped her. Strong John's hands. John, do not let them touch me again. Do not let me hear them. I could not beat it. She struggled to her feet. The mist billowed around her, and she stared like a frightened animal. Come along, Bronwyn, said Strong John, still in that gentle voice. Come along. He began to lead her on. No, Bronwyn dug her toes in, her eyes black with fear. No, I cannot. Bronwyn, you must come. No, she tore away from him, panting, then turned and began to run back the way she'd come, her thumbs over her ears, her hands blinkering her eyes. Bronwyn, shrieked Val, come back. But Bronwyn did not turn or hesitate. Soon she was out of sight. Now we are 5, thought Rowan. The spider's foul grown. She will not be able to go through the forest. She has had the branches she cut to make torches, Ellen says. Once she's out of here, she will stop and bind them, for the fear will die in her, and she will regain her senses. From this side, she can burn the silken door to nothing and lead through in safety. She is strong, she will be safe, she will return to the village like Alice. Val began to shiver. She looked shrunken and exhausted. Alice has not returned to Rin, she whispered. He's waiting for me at the edge of the forest. I feel it, I know it, I've known it all along. Never have we been apart for so long. Never in our lives since we were in the cradle. I have tried so hard not to think of it, but... Let us go, said Strong John heavily. We will tie ourselves together. None of us can be trusted not to stray. Bind with rope your flesh and blood. But the tears were rolling down Val's plain, muddy face. I cannot go further, she said. I knew it when I tried to call Alice as Bronwyn struggled in my arms. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, but I cannot go with you. She buried her face in her hands. You will not understand. You will think ill of me. I do not blame you, but I cannot go on alone. Half of me is missing, Alice. Alice is waiting for me. He needs me and I must go to him. She turned away. I have torches to make also, she said. I will move fast and catch up with Bronwyn. We will go together. Rowan, John, Alan and Marley watched silently as she trudged away, shoulders bowed. She did not look back. It is true, said Marley at last. It was as if half of Val departed when Alice did. She struggled bravely, but in the end she could not carry on without him. It is strange that both seemed so strong, as though nothing could touch them. 4, thought Rowan. There's only 4 of us now. So soon. The mountain is doing its work well, said Strong John, echoing Rowan's thoughts, and there is yet far to go. Alan smiled wearily. All the better then, that those who are friends continue together. Come on, let us go. And Alan, sing, added Marley. For once I wish to hear nothing else. They looped Marley's rope around their waist and bound themselves together in a line. John, Rowan, Alan and Marley. They trudged on, looking neither left nor right, keeping their eyes to the ground, their ears filled with Alan's singing. His voice was sweet, but it sounded small and sad in the mist, and they took little joy in it. It was fortunate that you regained your senses, Alan the baker. It's time to prevent me from sinking in the mud and taking poor Rowan with me, remarked Marley lightly after a time. I heard Rowan's voice calling your name, said Alan, shaking his head, and it was as though I was walking from a dream. There was a shocked yell from Strong John at the head of the line. He staggered backwards, pulling one wet and muddy leg over the treacherous ground in which it had plunged. The northwest path had failed, he called. I could not tell you how deep the bog is. We still have to find another way. He felt cautiously around him, but wherever he turned, the mud sank beneath his feet. What are we to do? Cried Rowan. The map's warning. And let your guide be made of wood. Marley began hesitant. We believe this to mean that the guide should be a person who would not feel too deeply about others. She thought for a minute. Perhaps the word have a different meaning altogether. Perhaps they mean exactly what they say and were intended to help us at just this moment. And so it was. The map's instructions were finally understood and carried out. They went back and cut the straightest branch they could find from one of the trees. They measured it against Rowan, the smallest of the party, and marked it at his shoulder height. And this branch, this wood, became their guide. John would plunge the branch into the mud ahead of them. Where it came to rest on the firm ground, the mud reached a point below the mark. They would step forward. When it sank so deep that the mud rose above the mark, he would try again until he found a safe stepping place. One step at a time, they struggled forward, wading often up to their chest in thick, sticky mud. Progress was painfully slow, and all the time the yellow-white mist floated above them, and sometimes shapes flitted just within their sight, and voices whispered, but they looked only forward and closed their ears to the moans and groans that tempted them, holding fast the rope that joined them one to the other. Finally, there came a time when on every side the wood sank so low the mark was covered. Then Alan and Marley shouldered John's load, and John took Rowan upon his back. And again they pushed forward, feeling the way, veering always to the northwest, till at last the mud began to firm beneath their feet, and the ground began to rise. And they knew that the dreadful journey was nearly at an end. Staggering and exhausted, they climbed out of the swamp and mist, past the twisted, dark-leaved trees, onto the land where grass grew again. Up and up they crawled to where the air smelled sweet and the sun shone, and they fell to the ground at last and slept. That's the end of that chapter.